what happens when a police chief takes the stand in the Chauvin trial? Check this out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. With Debbie Hines, our legal analyst and former trial lawyer, former assistant attorney general for the state of Maryland, former prosecutor. IamDebbieHines.com, her website and her Twitter handle. Debbie, welcome back. So what's the latest on the Chauvin trial, and where do you think it's going today? I know that they've been getting testimony from the ER physician. I caught that before I went on the air. What's up?
Okay, so Tom, actually, right now, one of the most exciting testimonies to date is occurring because it's with the Minneapolis police chief who's testifying now. When we came on, he was pretty much just going over his credentials and how he got into the force and, just kind of sort of more foundational stuff. But this is the officer, the chief who fired Chauvin right away because it was so egregious what happened. But before him, we had the doctor at the hospital, Dr. Langenfeld, I think his name was, and he was a young attending resident who was the one that took Mr. Floyd, now we know his body, into the hospital after the EMT and the ambulance took him there. Kind of have to look at some of my notes because he was kind of very technical as opposed to just speaking directly in what we call layman's terms, so everybody can understand what he's talking about in terms of the medical jargon. So I'm hoping the jurors took notes as well. But he said it was highly unlikely that Mr. Floyd died as a result of a heart attack, which is what the defense is trying to claim, and that he said it was no fluid around the heart. They got really technical as to what you look at to tell if an individual has succumbed due to a heart attack, and that he did say that it was more or less likely that it was his cause of death was due to oxygen deficiency, the very thing that Mr. Floyd was screaming out for more than 30 times, that he couldn't breathe. And he also addressed the defense's position that Mr. Floyd could have died from excited delirium, which has to do with the drugs in his system. And he refuted that theory as well. That there was nothing there to indicate it. But it's interesting on the excited delirium, even though he disputed that theory, that's one of the things that Chauvin said when he was speaking to his lieutenant, or that the lieutenant said that Chauvin said that, George Floyd was just acting crazy. Meanwhile, we all know that that's not true from the video. But I think that's what they're trying to, allude to there. So he was strong in the sense that he did say that Mr. Floyd definitely had an oxygen deficiency, and that was the likely cause of his death. The cross-examination really didn't do too much with him. They discussed the fact that George Floyd did have 2 times more the normal amount of carbon dioxide in his system, and that a healthy individual would have had a significant amount less. So I'm sure that once they get to their, meaning the defense position, they're going to actually point to some type of respiratory problem that they believe that George Floyd had. So all in all, I mean, Dr. Langenfeld, he came on, he did what he had to do. He's a young resident at the time, so even though he's a doctor, there's no doubt about that, but he still is a younger, physician. So I think they're just trying with him to just lay the foundation of what happened. Mr. Floyd, we know what happened at the scene. He was taken in the ambulance, and then the ambulance took him to the hospital. So they're just trying to pretty much lay that foundation. But there's really, most of what's going to happen is going to coming up now with the chief of police as well as with the other medical doctors, because actually the case is primarily probably going to rest on causation as to what was the cause of death, and that would be due to whatever the medical doctors and the actual medical examiner testifies about, which is yet to come.
Right. So my understanding of what I caught this morning too was that had he been able to breathe normally, he wouldn't have had high levels of carbon dioxide in his bloodstream, number one. So that kind of validates his I can't breathe. And number two, if he had been high on drugs and was having a drug freak out, which is what Chauvin had told a bystander immediately after the case, as I recall, he probably would have been sweaty because that's consistent with drug delirium, and he wasn't sweaty. He, so there was no symptoms of any of the stuff that basically Officer Chauvin and his buddies were claiming were the justification for dragging. Again, we have to remember, they dragged him out of the car after he was already restrained, handcuffed, and locked in the back of a police car. They dragged him out, put him on the street, and killed him.
Exactly. And that, we may never know what that's about because Chauvin didn't testify, but as to why they didn't get him back in the car, he was already handcuffed and in. And even though Mr. Floyd was saying that he was feeling a little bit claustrophobic, when have the police ever been concerned about someone being claustrophobic when they put him in a paddy wagon, or in this case, put him in the back of a car? So that just, I just think that it is what it is, and we're going to see if the jury can believe everything that the prosecution has set forth. But again, most of the cases are really going to hedge on the causation, and so I think that what the defense is going to do as we're seeing these next few witnesses come up is basically to determine if they can get one juror to be the one juror that can hang it, or if they can get a lesser charge conviction on manslaughter versus the murder charges. That's where we're headed.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Debbie Hines, trial lawyer. IamDebbieHines.com, and on both .com and also on Twitter. I am Debbie Hines. Debbie, thanks so much for dropping by again.
Thank you.